Welcome to the Nerdy Multiverse. She-Hulk is back with the 8th episode of the series, and this episode did pick up the story and everything else quite a bit, and had some Easter eggs that have to be talked about. So let's break the episode down, titled Ribbit and Rip It. Before we get started, we wanted to give a quick little shout to our merch site where we have brand new shirts, sweatshirts, and more. The designs heavily inspired by She-Hulk and the series, of course. If you wish to support us, feel free to go check that out. The link is in the description below. We also wanted to give a quick spoiler warning for those that haven't seen the episode, as we will be touching on it and previous episodes as well, so you have been warned. Let's begin. The title of the episode being Ribbit and Rip It resembles how the episode as a whole and who this episode actually starts off with, that being Leapfrog, or some call him Frogman. Ribbit and Rip It also being his signature sort of line that he says. The episode begins with Leapfrog confronting, or we should say attempting to confront, two people who are stealing from a mall, and his suit ends up malfunctioning, which ends up taking him to go to She-Hulk so that she can represent him in court against the guy who created the suit, which ends up being Luke Jacobson, the guy who created She-Hulk's suit, as well as Daredevil's, as we saw in a previous episode. This leaves Jennifer with a big problem, as she has to represent her client against her very own tailor. So she ends up going to Luke to tell him, and he gets upset, rips up the dress he was making for her for the gala, and says that she won't be his client anymore. And we cut right to the beginning of the court case as Luke waits for his lawyer to show up, who is running late. The doors open and we see that his lawyer is none other than Daredevil, Matt Murdock. During this court case, we hear Murdock say that the Sokovian Accords have been repealed, meaning that the accords that Iron Man signed in Civil War and ended up regretting and all of that is no more, so superheroes are out of the control of the government and have their own free will. Him saying this during the argument in the case practically helps him pull the case together rather quickly, especially after Leapfrog admits that he used the wrong fuel on the suit, which leaves him at fault and not Luke. After court, Jennifer is at the bar and Matt buys her a drink and they talk for a bit, where he gives her some advice on the two separate lives of Jennifer and She-Hulk, as well as being a superhero and a lawyer at the same time, telling her that Jennifer can be there for people when society fails them, and She-Hulk can be there for people when the law fails people. The best of both worlds, as Jen says, and much like how Daredevil lives his own life. Daredevil leaves after getting a call, and Jen gets a text from Todd, so she goes to see what he needs, and he basically just goes on about how he bought a Wakandan spear. And this all seemed really weird to me, specifically knowing how he was asking her if she knew if vibranium could pierce her skin when they went on their date. So I wonder if he has something to do with Intelligentsia himself as well. When Jen gets back home, Leapfrog calls her and tells her that he needs her help because he is being attacked. So she shows up and we see that Daredevil in his yellow suit is after Leapfrog. The yellow suit he is wearing in the show is directly from the comics and is the first suit that he was ever seen wearing in the books. Daredevil and She-Hulk get into a little scuffle, and might I say, Daredevil looked great in this whole scene. Seeing how agile he was really felt like you were looking at one of his comic books. She-Hulk does a thunderclap which knocks Daredevil over, and she finds out that he is Matt after taking off his helmet. So they stop fighting and he tells her that Leapfrog has kidnapped Luke, so they end up teaming up and going to save him. They get to Lilypad, Leapfrog's base of operations or hideout, and in this we can see that Leapfrog has a Leapfrog signal, obviously being a nod to Batman and the Bat Signal. We get a short but sweet hallway fight scene which felt so much like the Netflix Daredevil show, and Daredevil's billy clubs are much like they were in the comics, being able to connect to one another and become one, and having that sort of string in the middle of the two. She-Hulk and Daredevil end up saving Luke from Leapfrog, and Luke is back to being She-Hulk's tailor. After all of the fighting, the two sit on the roof together, and you can obviously tell that these two like each other a lot, and they end up, well, getting together before Daredevil heads back to Hell's Kitchen. After all of that, Nikki goes over to Jen's place, and they get ready for the gala that she is going to for getting Female Lawyer of the Year. There's two really cool references or Easter eggs as they get ready, as Jennifer talks to us about how this is going to be the big twist, telling us that maybe it's something like there's another Hulk, Hulk, but this time it's red. This being a huge nod to Red Hulk, and you could even say it's a reference to Red She-Hulk, She-Hulk's red counterpart. Now, I don't actually believe that Red Hulk will ever show up in this series. I do think the reference is cool and interesting, but to add on to the Red Hulk stuff, General Ross has also recently been rumored to being recasted in the MCU after the passing of the original actor William Hurt. If true, the recasting would make Red Hulk's introduction to the MCU sometime down the line even more likely. After Jen talks to us about all of that, Nikki comes out with all of the makeup brushes in between her fingers like claws, this obviously being a big reference to Wolverine, something that this show has actually done twice now. She-Hulk gets to the gala and they announce her as the Female Lawyer of the Year, but then announce other lawyers as well, including Mallory Book, who represented her against Titania and who also works as a lawyer at GLK&H. When She-Hulk is about to give her speech, the screen behind her gets hacked and taken over by Intelligentsia, leaking all of the information that Josh took from her phone. They call her horrible names and try to pin her as a bad person. She-Hulk starts to get angry here and breaks the screen, and then she spots some guys in the back of the room recording her, obviously being some of Intelligentsia's goons, and as angry as she is, she goes on a rampage and crashes through the building and goes after one of them. When she gets a hold of the guy, the DODC, who we also saw previously in the Miss Marvel series, are outside and aiming their weapons at her, and the episode ends after she lets the guy go and puts her hands up. Wow, this episode was actually pretty good, and it really stepped up the game compared to the last few. Whether it was with the action or the plot, everything felt a lot better and improved. It's getting intense now, and I'm very anxious and interested to see where this all ends up going for the finale next week. The dynamic between She-Hulk and Daredevil was a lot of fun to see, and I loved seeing the first two fight each other a bit and then team up against Leapfrog. The portrayal of Daredevil was done wonderfully, and I have already seen a ton of people complaining about how he smiled and made a tiny joke in the episode, which, as crazy as that sounds to complain about, it's actually happening. But Daredevil has always been a charismatic person, and he smiles all the time, and the jokes he said to She-Hulk would be something that he would say to a fellow hero in the comics. The action in this episode was great, and it definitely had a little sprinkle of Netflix Daredevil in there, and I really enjoyed this episode. It was definitely my favorite out of the whole series as of now. I am still a little worried that the finale will end up being rushed, especially because we still really don't know who the main villain is, if there is one, but a lot of those worries definitely went away with this episode, but we will have to wait and see how the finale goes next week. We can't wait for next week's finale of the series, but before then, make sure to let us know your thoughts on this episode and what you think will happen in the finale down in the comments. Before we get out of here, we want to make sure that you stay tuned to the channel as Werewolf by Night comes out today, so you should be expecting to see us make a video on that as well. With all of that being said, thank you all for watching, and if you wish to see more nerdy content like this, make sure to sub to the channel with notifications on, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. We will see you all the next time that we go through and explore the nerdy multiverse.